Culture is based on several dimensions. The first layer is the one which is visible and that everyone sees. The differences are obvious and easy to understand. The second and the third ones are more complex. They represent the foundation that will induce many behaviors in an explicit and implicit way. These layers set up the personality of the individual and are deeply rooted in him. All these layers are just the result of a slow and deep mental programming exercised by family, friends, and the whole society. It is only by being fully aware of this that the individual acquires his freedom of thought and opens himself to other cultures. Indeed, there are always several truths, and accepting that the other simply has another cultural program allows to live in harmony. Understanding cultural differences requires being able to remove the distorting glasses from one's own culture. That's the only way not to misjudge what we do not understand when having a relation with somebody coming from a different culture. Moreover, by accepting and understanding the different perspectives offered by cultural differences, we enrich each other and improve our perception of the world. This approach to intercultural communication, based on mutual respect, is extremely important if we are to build a better, fairer, and safer world. Communication between people of different backgrounds does not take sufficient account of cultural differences. However, major problems of misunderstanding occur regularly because people misinterpret messages. These simple problems of misunderstandings are the source of many conflicts, while everyone is sincere and honest. This presentation highlights some classic points that lead to misunderstandings related to cultural differences. Understanding the different cultural codes allows you to know your own culture and to break down barriers between people. When communication becomes possible, trust can set in and many things become possible. When we understand each other better, we get closer, and what really matters simply becomes our humanity. Very often we tend to judge the other through the distorting glasses of our own culture. This gives a false view of the person with whom we communicate. This false vision leads to prejudices and unfortunately often to the rejection of the other who is different. In fact, the issue of cross-cultural communication is far from being exclusive between people from European and non-European countries. Problems also arise between Europeans, even though they are supposed to have a common cultural background. In fact, problems of intercultural communication are extremely common between all peoples. Indeed, the problems even occur between people from different regions within the same country. When we talk about communication, we have to look at different elements that compose it. Number one, even in an exchange that is mostly verbal, part of the message is nonverbal. Number two, communication integrates feedback to check or improve the clarity of message. Number three, communication depends on its context, and this context will influence communication even without the people involved noticing it. Nonverbal communication, in that case, will alter or impact the messages, like a place where the communication takes place, the kind of message, the kind of people involved, their age, their gender, how people are dressed, their social status, and so on. All that is what we call the context. Indeed, the context is anything that influences the communication without using words or any kind of obvious message. In certain cultures, communication is based on low context and explicit messages. These messages are direct, straight. This implies a great deal of precision in the verbal aspect of communication, implying precision with respect to time commitments. In other cultures, the messages are more implicit. In that case, the messages need to be decoded thanks to the observation of context, body language, attitudes, and behavior. Implicit communication is indirect and discrete. People are supposed to speak one after the other in an orderly fashion. It is more important to listen than to speak. The speakers beat around the bush to convey the message. Conflicts should be avoided because they quickly become personal. Implicit communication actually is a form of diplomacy that is found to varying degrees in different cultures, including in Southern and Eastern Europe. In professional negotiations, communication can be both explicit and implicit. It is therefore necessary to develop a good capacity for observation by being attentive to everything that may be implicit. In fact, when a person of implicit culture meets an interlocutor of explicit culture, the first one could wrongly feel attacked or upset. It is therefore fundamental to be aware of these communication differences. The more implicit the message, the more important and even vital is to respect the face, pride, and honor. For cultures that communicate through a high context, respect for the face conditions the whole relationship. If you make lose face of person from that culture, it becomes impossible to reconnect with them. The idea that everyone has a similar relationship with time is false, at least between people of different cultures. Respect for an appointment, the ability to look ahead, to project into the future, the notion of lost time are all culturally relative. When communicating, societies with high context and implicit messages have generally low regard for the value of time. They actually need to assume it is widely available in order to achieve effective communication. On the other hand, societies with explicit messaging give a high value to time. They consider that it is a scarce resource. Efficiency thus requires a low context. The opposite can be source of confusion. Monochronism. Only one task will be performed within a determined time limit, not what we call society of the diary. Polychronism is the contrary. It is nice and even useful to carry out several tasks or communications at the same time. In fact, a monochronic person who communicates with a polychronic person will often be frustrated by what he or she considers to be the lack of attention or interest on the part of the interlocutor. Emotional or affective. The interlocutors reveal their thoughts and feelings. They express themselves emotionally and dramatically. Their attitude is warm and expressive. Neutral. The interlocutor do not reveal what they think or feel and value self-control. Behavior during negotiations tends to be cool. The problem is when an interlocutor of neutral culture communicates with an expressive one. He may wrongly feel attacked. The use of arms, hands and fingers to communicate differs subtly from one culture to another. So hand gestures can have a friendly connotation in some countries, but on the contrary, mean the worst insults in others. In some countries, people use a lot of hand gestures to communicate. It is like a parallel language only nationals can fully understand. Unfortunately, it can lead to a lot of potential misunderstandings. Proxemics is about how people use space. In fact, this use is determined by culture. For example, the distance that people keep each other, or the design of houses and cities. Every culture develops its rules of proximity that are learned since the childhood. The Arabs, compared to the English, stand closer to each other, often raising their voices and touch more frequently. When people with different proxemics rules meet, this difference can create great discomfort and damage communication. This problem can create a situation of cultural clash, where each one risks miscoding its relationship with the other. The frequency of touch in communication varies from one place to another in the world. The literature distinguishes between high-touch societies, among which are the Mediterranean countries, Arabs and the Jews, and low-touch societies, which includes the British, German, and many Asian cultures. To take an example, when a Greek speaks with a British, he never says he's getting closer, touching him on the shoulder and even holding the arm, demonstrating his willingness to convince. The English interlocutor, being uncomfortable, does everything possible to get away from this violation of personal space and try to restore a distance that seems more suitable. Doing so, he takes the risks of appearing cold and distant. The result is a continual toing and froing that makes the discussion painful. Universalism is the belief that ideas, practices, and rules can be applied everywhere without modification. Rules are more important than relationship. Universalist culture believe on formal rules which should be applied to everyone without any distinction. The rules of a group outweigh always the interests of individuals. On the other hand, particularism is the conviction that circumstances dictate the manner in which ideas and practices are to be applied. For them, the individual circumstances can be more important than the rules of the group. People focus on relationships, working things out to suit the stakeholders. There is a high level of universalism in countries such as Australia, Germany, and Sweden, for example. People in societies with high power distance accept a hierarchic order in which everybody has a place. This needs no further justification. In societies with low power distance, people strive to equalize the distribution of power. They demand justification for inequalities of power. If we cannot belong to a group which is defined very clearly, we shouldn't try to mimic their behavior or to break into the group at all costs. Generally, it is possible to communicate while acknowledging one's difference. Cultures may have a different approach to how to analyze and deal with the problem. This can lead to misunderstandings and cultural clashes. The Anglo-Saxon approach, based on the scarcity of time and the concept of time is money, is very direct and based on facts. In other Western cultures, it is necessary to examine the facts through a preliminary theoretical analysis, while some Asian cultures consider that everything we see or do is only temporary. Religion has a very important impact on beliefs about what is right or true. Not all religions bring the same forms of answer to the same human questions. What do we do on earth? What is good and evil? And how to secure a future after our death? In fact, only respect and tolerance of the various proposed responses must prevail in order for harmony and good to prevail. The place of men and women is at the root of great cultural differences in the world. Although there are still slight differences in Europe between countries, the deep trend is aimed at total equality between men and women. This is a fundamental value to which Europeans attach great importance.
Well, most management books have been written by Americans, US nationals. And because of that fact, we have the misconception that we are the only ones who understand how business is done. So when we send someone to France, to wherever in the world, we bring with us this attitude that we are here to teach you how it's done. But the culture does not embrace those cultural standards that we have in the US. That need to mix business and pleasure is practically universal. The only place on earth where I have not experienced it is in the United States. So there is this disconnect. You will see a US national going to Latin America and he will refuse to go to dinner at the president's house, president of the company's house, and because he feels that it's uncomfortable, it's just too close for comfort. And the Brazilian on the other side is feeling that this is an insult. And so the trust cannot be built. And people don't realize, because they don't know. And so they feel that in their culture they're doing the right thing. And the Brazilian are feeling that this person is absolutely not the right partner for the transaction, and they keep on looking. So trust is truly the core issue.
Trust in a person is built differently across cultures. There are two main ways to place your trust. The first is a trust that is based on logic, on facts. In the business world, for instance, this means that it will be necessary to prove by facts and not by feelings that one deserves to obtain that trust. The other approach is more instinctive and based on human feelings. Relationships are fundamental, and you have to get to know each other personally by spending time together to gain that trust.